Welcome back. You know, when New York Governor Andrew Cuomo took office last year, it sure seemed that the stage was set for a decision that would allow natural gas drilling in the state of New York. Environmental impact studies were completed, proposed drilling rules, they were drafted, and top state environmental officials announced that drilling permits could be granted as early as this year. But the big question still remains, will they?
Well, Rich, the pace of what was once a sprint to allow hydrofracking in New York State has now slowed to a crawl, despite 4 years of intense study and aggressive lobbying for technology that's already been in New York for years. The future of hydrofracking seems much more uncertain than it did last year. State regulators say they need more time to deal with the unprecedented number of public comments that came after the Department of Environmental Conservation released its draft of drilling regulations. 61,000 comments sounding off for or against fracking came in.
It's going to be months before they've all been reviewed. I've got over 50 staff people as part of a team that are going to look at those individual comments. So those comments will inform the process going forward. They'll inform what the final product looks like. We went through this process once before in an earlier draft, and we made a lot of changes as a result of comments, and we expect that to happen again.
What's worrisome to others is that the New York State budget included no money for hydrofracking, money that would go to the DEC for hiring oversight supervisors. But Commissioner Martens says even though they may be lacking resources in some areas, they will still hold the gas companies' feet to the fire on important issues like disclosing what's in the fracking fluid.
It's not a concern for us because we're going to know what's in the fracking fluid. They don't have a plan for us that demonstrates that they can send it to a licensed and permitted facility that meets state and federal standards. They won't be able to drill.
Let's bring our table back in and put a bow on this in terms of where we are, and that's impossible, but I'm going to try. Stuart, I'll start with you. I've heard arguments being made that given the climate, not just in Albany, where we are in the calendar, it is an election year, New York may have already missed its window, and that people have gone elsewhere, and that hydrofracking isn't nearly going to ever be the scope where it might have been if a year ago this was done on a larger scale. You buy that?
No, I really don't. The gas is there. Who knows what's going to happen with gas prices in the future? I don't have a crystal ball. I think that the approach that New York State has taken is the right approach for this. What New York is doing is saying, we're going to come up with the right environmental protections so that this could be done properly.
There's no question right now, because of the success of shale development outside of New York, literally everywhere else but New York, the commodity price has become very low. And so it is a fair statement to say that the economics for drilling have been reduced. That doesn't mean that drilling won't occur. It probably means the pace of development will probably be slower. I have no doubt they're going to proceed on a relatively slow, measured pace. They're probably going to allow some initial wells, a limited number of permits, see how their new regulations are impacted by that, and how the environment and all the other considerations that are out there are addressed, and not the least of which is to probably reassure the public that the rules in New York, the gold standard for the industry, are going to take care of the concerns.
When you talk about the gold standard, and a bunch of people at the table here have mentioned the Halliburton loophole, which is that people say the federal government doesn't require these companies to disclose the ingredients in the fracking fluid. My question to you, Dennis, where do you disclose your ingredients?
New York, as my friend here could tell you right now, the DEC has already required that of us. We have to post that information with the DEC. We also post that information at each well location.
Have you listed any of those ingredients as trade secrets? Is every ingredient listed?
No, remember, these are contracted services. We don't actually develop the formula ourselves. It's outside parties that do.
But surely you know.
Let me finish. What we said very early on, as soon as this issue became an issue a few years ago, we went right to our contract suppliers and said, if you're going to provide that product, we need to be able to disclose it.
From the very start, back in 2008, we said that DEC's position was that before any permits were going to be issued, that all of the water wells within 1,000 feet of a drilling operation would have to be tested exactly for that reason.
And what would they be tested for? What would they be tested for? For what's in the fracking fluid?
They would be tested to create a baseline to see what was in the water.
What would they be tested for? Because this is what happened in Pennsylvania, where they tested.
Well, but
they did a general test as a good. Now let me finish.
No, but that would be something that would be in the comments.
This is exactly.
But they would be tested for whatever was necessary.
They test they'd run a general test, but they don't test for what's in the fracking fluid. It is protected as proprietary information like McDonald's special sauce. Then these families come back and they say, look what's in my water. And the company comes back and says, well, we tested for something else.
But again,
You're going to
Senator,
have to
Senator,
That's the problem,
I can only
and that's
speak
how
to what
this
the
industry needs to be held
concept
accountable.
was, because
Exactly.
the goal was really a dual goal. One was to hold industry accountable and to even the playing field.
Then you've
so
got to
that
make
if
sure
you're
in
that
New York
landowner,
State that they test for
then
what's in
make
the
sure
fracking
that
fluid,
that's a
and
comment
it has
to
to
the
be laid out.
that was the concept.
They don't want to hear this. Do you want to
Gentlemen,
If I
here's
have a
the one
baseline-
thing I can't get around, and that is on the time issue. And
But,
I'd like to,
if I have
trust
a
me, I'm going to let you
baseline,
all get one comment in before
we
we're
will
done.
see
so
the
you
They don't
difference
test
at
for
the
what's in the
end.
fracking
You
fluid.
test for
I tell
what
you,
it
you
looked like
guys,
to begin with and what it looks like
ought
at
to
the
have
end.
your own shows here, because nobody listens to time cues.
I just want to say,
As
the environmentalist here, environmentalists get a bad rap for being the troublemakers, and I'm being the most polite
You
person
are.
here on
All
stage.
right. Kim, please. All right. You got any strong senses where we're going to be a year from now?
What you see within, Albany is that there's no money in the state budget for this. DEC is saying they're going to give an extremely limited amount of permits to do this, and you're probably going to see a few companies, get permitting in 2012 and move on with this. But there may be a chilling effect where you see other companies move to Ohio, where we're not quite sure how the regulations are going to shake out there yet. But I think you're going to start to see it in New York.
I've lived in the state almost 60 years. I've raised my family here. I serve on a school board here. If for 1 minute there was an issue for me in terms of, with my almost 40 years experience in this industry, with whether we could do this safely or not and protect the drinking water supply, I would not be an advocate for this. And all the jobs in the world and all the economic development wouldn't be sufficient to offset making sure that we safeguard the water supply.
What do you think happens here? We sit down at the same table in 12 months.
So I think that we're putting our heads in the sand if we don't acknowledge that there are significant economic development and energy policy benefits from developing domestic natural gas. Okay, there's no question about that.
Robert?
Well, I think 12 months from now, I'll be surprised if there's drilling actually going forward. This technology was not in widespread use 10, 15, 20 years ago.
And that's when you were running out of natural gas.
And there could be new technologies coming online. There are actually other techniques for fracking that can be used that aren't so water intensive, aren't so pollution intensive, and don't have the same level of risk, but they're far more expensive and can't be done economically
I'm up
with
against
gas
it
prices.
for time here, Senators. Final word from you.
We've got to make sure that we keep the pressure on and ask the tough questions to ensure that not only is it safe, but that when the industry breaks something, that they fix it. Whether it be an airplane, a car, child safety seat, all those things are safe most of the time. They break sometimes. When they break it, New York State better make sure they fix it.
All right. I want to thank our panel, Dennis Holbrook, Stuart Gruskin, State Senator Greg Ball, and Robert Moore. And I want to thank all our guests for that matter for joining us tonight. Kim and I will be right back after this quick commercial break. Please stay with us.